Well, we're early. We're like super early now. This video is actually going out like legitimately right after midnight, so we're going to be one of the first outlets that I know of personally.
I was to say not hardly, but
to talk about The Amazing Spider-Man 2, which we're going to be doing in just a few minutes. But before we get started, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention, unfortunately, we've had another tragedy in the world of Hollywood, and this is a big one, especially for me, because I remember growing up, being one of my favorite movies of growing up was Who Framed Roger Rabbit. And I love the character of Eddie Valiant. I always have. And obviously the Super Mario Brothers movie with him and John Leguizamo and Dennis Hopper.
We were just going through them just now, and I forgot that one.
I can't forget that one, sir.
Because he regretted it so much.
Yes. Unfortunately, the world lost Bob Hoskins the other day, and it's a tragedy every time that we lose anybody. And it seems like it's becoming a lot more normal to lose people. It seems like every week we lose somebody big, and this is just, it's ridiculous how people can be taken away so quickly like that.
What's really unfortunate is that it was about a year and a half ago that he was diagnosed with Parkinson's, and then he officially retired so he could like spend what he had left with his family.
Makes sense.
And apparently it was pneumonia that did it.
It's crazy.
But he has a lot of great performances and movies on his resume. Like I was just telling you about Mona Lisa, which oddly was his only Oscar nomination.
That's crazy.
It's like it's kind of like a gangster movie. It has him and Michael Caine in it. It's really great if you can check it out. I was never really raised on Who Framed Roger Rabbit like most people that I know. I've only seen it like once, but I have seen Hook about 500 times.
Yeah, Hook is awesome.
There's this great anecdote I always heard about where there was a scene in Hook where my Spider-Man logo's rubbed up against the couch. There's a whole thing on the back.
Yeah.
There's an anecdote about Hook where there was a scene that they were doing that it required over 300 extras. And it was like this big, elaborate set piece. But the scene was so complicated that Spielberg just kind of had to give up on it after a while. They went through this whole complicated setup with all these extras, and the scene couldn't come to fruition.
Yeah.
So Bob Hoskins bought beer for every single extra that was in that scene, and
Nice.
there were over 300 of them.
It's crazy.
So, are you plugged in? It's telling us we have a low battery already.
We're supposedly
3
plugged
minutes
in.
in. And later in his career, he had some great roles like Hollywoodland and Mrs. Henderson Presents. And there's a third one that's on the tip of my tongue, and I can't think of it. He also did an interesting movie with Tom Berenger in the early 90s called Shattered, which he was really good in. He's the only good thing about it, really.
That says something right there.
Yeah, so his last movie, his swan song, unfortunately, was Snow White and the Huntsman.
Oh, yeah.
But, you know, he has a great resume anyway, so
Indeed.
there'll be plenty to remember him with.
Absolutely. And don't think that he won't be coming to Versus sometime soon, because I'm pretty sure, I can guarantee that's going to happen very soon.
He's J. Edgar Hoover and Oliver Stone's Nixon, too.
Ah, very nice.
So, having said that, should we have some fun now?
Oh, absolutely.
Alright. Obviously, our first movie is the only movie that came out in a wide release this week, which is The Amazing Spider-Man 2. Which I wasn't very excited for in its early production days because I didn't really care for Mark Webb's first movie with the Lizard, Risa Fons as the Lizard, because they retold the origin story in pretty much the same fashion. It just seemed dull. It took me a while to get into Andrew Garfield, and most importantly, the Lizard was a really boring and weak villain. And I just really, I tried watching it again when it came out on DVD. About an hour into it, I was like, well, I guess this is how I feel about it. Because I was hoping, it would have gotten better, but it didn't. It actually got a little worse. I don't know. Well, maybe I'll try again later, but so needless to say, I wasn't really, hyped for this one. Especially since everybody started accusing it as more news started to break about what was going on with this movie's story, a whole lot of Spider-Man 3 comparisons started to happen. Because everybody's complaint about Spider-Man 3 was how overloaded it was.
Way too many villains.
Among many other things, mainly how overloaded it was.
Yeah.
And word got out that this one was going to have Norman Osborn, Harry Osborn, the Rhino, and Electro. All in the same movie.
Yes.
And really late in the process, B.J. Novak was cast, and apparently he's supposed to be somebody important at some point. And all these characters are in the movie. And that really, really worried people. People continued to get worried when Jamie Foxx was cast as Electro. Because that really seems like one of those joke things. Remember the rumor that got spread where Eddie Murphy was going to play the Riddler?
Yes.
That's what I was thinking when Jamie Foxx. I had heard Jamie Foxx was cast as Electro. I did not think it was real.
Michael Jackson as Robin. There's pictures that got out a long time ago for the first '89 Batman.
So I sat down with this movie, wondering what was going to happen, and I kind of love it.
Oh, absolutely.
Apparently it's not getting a great reaction, which is really funny because I thought the one right before this one got too good of a reaction.
Mm.
So naturally I'm on the opposite end of things, which is kind of irritating, but that's just the way it works sometimes. What they do is, I'm trying to think. We're gonna do the spoiler video, so
Yeah, spoiler alert coming tomorrow.
I'm trying to separate what's on what. I probably should have done that in my head before we started.
Might not have been a bad idea.
We kind of just started. You're the one that doesn't edit, so
I'm aware.
Any fuck ups fall on you.
Yes, as always.
Okay. The main villain of the story is Electro.
Yes.
And basically he is Max Dillon, who is basically Jamie Foxx doing his impression of white guys. Whenever you've heard him do that, like when he would imitate DiCaprio telling stories about the set of Django. That's basically how he plays Max Dillon, pre super villainy. And he is walked all over, and he has this. We mentioned a year ago when we were doing this video for Iron Man 3, we talked about the same process. We have a villain that exactly mirrors Jim Carrey's portrayal of Edward Nygma to start this movie.
Yep.
He is extremely obsessive when it comes to Spider-Man. And basically, because of one meeting on the sidewalk, is under the impression that he and Spider-Man are best friends. And the Spider-Man knows his name even though he saw it on his badge. I love the pause that's in there, by the way. How do you know my name? It's on your badge. So naturally, after being walked all over by everybody, he's working at Oscorp. Everybody else has left, and he's there to do the work by himself. And something goes horribly awry, and they basically cover up that whole accident. And a lot, I mean it happens in all of them, but it really reminded me a lot of the when Dr. Octopus woke up in the hospital in Raimi's second movie.
Yep.
And he becomes Electro. That scene where he unleashes himself in the middle of New York, I like to refer to as Electro Unchained. Trademark. And the other half of the story is the continuation of Peter and Gwen's love story. Those are the main two stories, and then we have the side plot with Harry, where I was not under the impression that this isn't a spoiler or anything. You just look at the cast list.
Mm-hmm.
I was under the impression, what I had heard long before this movie actually came to be was that when they were still working on the first one, this trilogy, instead of starting with Norman Osborn like they did with Raimi's movies, they were going to build up to him through the trilogy. And he was going to be, Norman Osborn as the Green Goblin was going to be the big villain of the entire trilogy. Which really excited me when Chris Cooper was cast, because I thought that was brilliant.
Absolutely.
That one scene that Norman Osborn has in the trailer is his only scene before he dies. we completely skip over Norman Osborn. And I didn't even know this going in. It's weird to me because it was big news when he was cast. And he's in the trailer. Chris Cooper goes uncredited. That's how small the part of Norman Osborn is. So, that's something that brings it down. Like, that story, even though I was really disappointed we weren't going to have enough Chris Cooper as Norman Osborn, or Norman Osborn completely, that's one thing down that people thought was going to pack the movie too much. Everybody knows Harry does become the Golem before the movie's over, but...
It's actually in the trailer.
Yeah. And his face is on some of the posters, too.
Yeah.
So, I guess we can talk about a few things. One thing I want to talk about is, we also should probably talk about real quick, the Rhino. I was actually thinking this. Before the movie started, I was really hoping they would do this, and I was really happy when they did. I think that's what made me like this movie, made me change my mind on this movie so quickly, was there was one thing in my head I was saying they really needed to do, and the movie started and they fucking did it, and I was so happy they did it. The movie starts with the Rhino, and then goes from there.
Yep.
That was the one thing I was thinking, was if the Rhino's going to be in this movie, he's obviously going to be... Mark Webb even went on record to say the Rhino is in the movie for 4 minutes, like months before it came out. So I thought, well, naturally they should just make him the opening scene. Like how Bond movies always had the big... There's obviously a big opening before we come to... There's a big opening in the past before they show the title, and then our next action scene in present day. It's the second action scene of the movie, but the first one in present day. I thought that was a good way to utilize him if they felt they had to.
Especially casting someone like Paul Giamatti in the role.
Yeah. It's like, you know they gotta do something. And people who are critical about performances and stuff like that, Paul Giamatti is awfully goofy in this movie, despite the fact that he's playing a villain. But here's the thing with that is... Number one, you gotta know it's conscious because it's Paul Giamatti. Mm-hmm. The dude is like an acting god. The thing was he said in an interview that he was basically gonna play this up as hammy and over the top as possible because he knew he was playing a comic book villain and he was just gonna have stupid fun with it. And if that's the way Paul Giamatti felt the character should be played, as far as acting's concerned, I'll take Paul Giamatti's word for it.
Absolutely.
He basically wanted the character to be this silly caricature of a supervillain. So, if you think the performance is kind of stupid, that's what Giamatti was going for. So, that's perfectly fine by me.
It worked fine for me.
Because there's plenty of other serious villains in the movie.
Yeah.
That may have been another thing he was trying to kind of balance that out.
Makes sense.
Because this is a good segue. Now I want to talk about Jamie Foxx. Despite the fact that he kind of really, really plays up the pathetic, obsessive parts of his character, Jamie Foxx actually does something really great here, which is, when you watch the movie, when he becomes Electro basically has, like, godlike powers.
Yeah.
He's basically a villainous Dr. Manhattan. Is basically what Electro is. Even the color.
Still in blue.
But the thing is well, I don't know why I'm doing this with my hands so much, but I'm trying to get my expressions out. The thing that Jamie Foxx does so well here is, even when he becomes the Electro that is destroying the city and probably thousands of lives, if not more, he's not so much like an obsessive psychopath so much as he is just really, really sad and pathetic. So much so that even when he's destroying the city, you feel bad for him because it gets to a point where he's saying he's not even doing it on purpose. It's just people assume he's a supervillain right away, and they make him an enemy as soon as they see him.
He just wants acceptance.
Yeah, but he somebody actually told me they were kind of offended by this, but I think that's kind of pushing it. But they said they didn't like how quickly Max's sad and, like, kind of psychological and social awkwardness psychological problems and social awkwardness. I don't think psychological awkwardness is a thing.
It could be.
But, switches so quickly to him going crazy and destroying the city and killing people. I can kind of see where they're coming from, where the switch seems to happen really quickly, but I don't know if it's so much as I don't think Elektra runs on being psychotic. It's just anger.
Yeah.
Because he's been walked over so much. I thought that was the whole point.
It's the network thing. I'm mad as hell and I can't take it anymore.
But yeah, by the end, he's a full-on villain, and the more sympathetic parts of him kind of tend to drift away. But I actually really like that, because one of the things I hated, it works well if it's done right, but I didn't think they did it well with the Lizard. I can't fucking stand it when big supervillains suddenly turn good at the drop of a hat. I think that's just fucking ridiculous when that happens. I don't think this is a spoiler to say. I was really happy that Elektra never did that.
Nope.
Once Elektra becomes a supervillain, he fucking stays there. And I really like that they did that. I guess while we're on the villains now, we might as well talk about Harry. To my understanding, Dane DeHaan has been getting some kind of mixed reactions. Well, for starters, he's an extremely acclaimed actor, because he's still relatively young. He's older than he looks, but he's still relatively young. And he's been bursting on the scene with, Chronicle. In Chronicle, he was compared to young DiCaprio. And, you have Kill Your Darlings. People actually talked about, obviously it didn't go anywhere, but when Kill Your Darlings was at Sundance, they talked Oscar buzz for him. And of course, The Place Beyond the Pines, and he did that Metallica movie that I heard was awesome, but unfortunately I never saw. He's really breaking out. He's got all kinds of stuff that's already happened and is going to happen. He's going to be in Devil's Knot, or he is in Devil's Knot, which we're about to talk about. And everybody loves him right now, but he's getting basically mixed reactions because I guess of the way Harry's written. It's nothing that he does. Because Harry kind of does he's kind of a cliche emo kid. He's even got the haircut.
The Michael Pitt.
That fucking haircut. And his very first scene is the scene where Norman Osborn's on his deathbed. And after Norman Osborn is gone, for a while there, Harry's story is basically the story of Richie Rich.
Yeah.
All the way up to him being at the head of the table. I expected Harry to start drinking a milkshake loudly.
No McDonald's in Oscorp, though.
No, they're not that happy.
No.
It was in there when Norman had it abolished. And the workers killed. So, by eating their own food. Yeah. So, but then, as the movie progresses, obviously we know the story of Harry. He basically has the same whatever was going on with Norman Osborn. And now he's, Norman says the whole, you can feel the early symptoms, you can feel your hand shaking, can't you, and stuff like that. So we know, and we see Norman's hand, which is, goblin-like.
Yep.
Which is awesome, by the way. So we know something horrible is happening to Harry, and he's probably going to get to that point before the movie's over, even though the third one's already in practically pre-production.
Yes.
So, and the spin-off movie's already being talked about. Marvel is the fucking king of the world right now.
Indeed. Such a great purchase from Disney.
So, that leaves us with when Harry does turn. Mind you, once again, I'm going to go ahead and tell you this, even though I'm sure you already figured it out just by process of elimination. And the fact that it's in the fucking trailer, so it doesn't matter. We have 20 minutes left of this when Harry's the Goblin.
Yep.
But I think most people probably put that together. I think people are, even when people see trailers, I think that people are smart enough now to put that together. The trailers are basically full of shit now. That's why I didn't watch them.
It's kind of like how Raimi used Venom at the end of 3.
Yeah. Venom is in Spider-Man 3 more than Harry as the Goblin is in this.
Absolutely.
But obviously, we'll get to that on the other video.
Yes. Just to whet your appetite.
When Harry turns into the Goblin, I don't know how people are going to take this. I could see reactions from both ends of the spectrum. I think Dane DeHaan's Goblin is fucking awesome.
Absolutely.
I was a little concerned, because I grew up on Raimi's movies, so I'm used to Willem Dafoe. More so than James. We'll use Willem Dafoe, because we're talking about the Green Goblin.
Yeah.
Because, to my understanding, Franco is supposed to be Hobgoblin, technically.
Yeah, basically. That's exactly what he was.
But, no, and this Harry is the Green Goblin.
Yes.
And, I was concerned about the fact that when I heard he's not going to have a helmet, they're just going to use his face. And I was thinking, well, Dane DeHaan's not very scary looking. Well, Mark Webb and the makeup people and anybody else involved in this, probably Dane DeHaan himself, made sure that Dane DeHaan was fucking scary by the time he became the Green Goblin.
He's going to scare small children this weekend without doubt.
When I first saw his face, because I tried to avoid the promotional stuff, because I knew how much they were blowing. Because I was like, I guarantee I'm seeing the end of the movie if I look at anything in that trailer.
The TV spot does have the exact end of the movie in it.
Alright. But luckily I probably wouldn't like the movie near as much as I do if I had watched the promotional stuff. Which might be why the movie's not getting a great reaction.
It's possible.
Goddamn fucking marketing fucks it up every time.
Of course.
When I saw Harry as the Goblin for the first time in this movie, I was sold immediately. His fucking laugh,
yes,
his appearance, the way they did the thing with his hair where it's kind of shaped like the helmet would be. He just had this ghoulish look about him. And the voice. There was I saw an interview where Jamie Foxx and Dane DeHaan were being interviewed and basically talking about their villains, and they were asked to answer some of the questions in their villainous voices. Mm-hmm. And of course Jamie Foxx can go on and off, and Dane DeHaan said, I was sitting there going, I guarantee there's no way Dane DeHaan can do that on the spot. And of course he said, I can't really switch it on and off like Jamie can. So it's also worth noting a hilarious anecdote that Jamie Foxx told. You kind of struggle to hear it because a lot of what went into Electro's voice was in post, I assume.
Oh, yeah.
But apparently when doing just the voice by itself, Jamie Foxx said he took inspiration, of all people, from Alec Baldwin. I'm sure I'll see this again. I'll listen harder for it next time.
Yeah.
It's probably drowned out by the how they amped it up, though. So yes, I was very pleased with the way all the villains were handled.
Absolutely.
I'm probably going to be in a minority there, but yeah, I thought they handled everything as well as they could have, putting so much in there all at once. So the other aspect is what any other movie would probably be really boring with, which is the love story between Peter and Gwen.
But Mark Webb knows how to write this stuff.
Yes, obviously Mark Webb did 500 Days of Summer.
Yes.
But normally in movies like this, it's kind of like, alright, this is just basically there for, forced character development. Who really gives a shit? But surprisingly, Peter and Gwen's relationship is one of the stronger aspects of the movie.
Yeah, definitely.
Within a movie that's, in my opinion, has a lot of strong aspects. Once again, I'm pretty sure I'm not going to be fully agreed with by a lot of people, but this is just my... I'm sure there's plenty of fanboys or anti-fanboys that are going to, do what it ever needed to do, but fuck it. And here's the thing, and also Sally Field, who is almost always great. There's a couple of scenes where she does get to make an impression, but for the most part, she's just naturally good at what she does, so... She handles the Aunt May part well. Regarding... There's one more thing. I'm trying to figure out how to say this without going into the other video. This movie is probably going to seem really, really long to people. Because, let me just say this. When this movie has a half hour to go, people are probably going to be ready to go home. But that didn't bother me. I wanted as much of this movie as I could get. But the great thing that it does, and the reason for that, is because once again, I may be in a minority. I'm going to say that a lot because I know that I am. I much preferred the feel of Raimi's movies to the last movie. This one feels a lot more like one of Raimi's movies. Mm. It's got apparently this is a criticism people have. This movie has a lot of humor in it.
Yes.
Like a massive abundance of it. And yeah, it might seem kind of stupid in context, but especially since, I love Nolan. I really do love Nolan. But he started this bullshit where everybody thinks superhero movies have to be grounded in reality and as dark as they can be. Yeah. They can't be fun anymore. So thank you, Nolan, for that. Taking our fun away. But here's the thing. This movie goes to some really, really dark places.
Yeah.
If you're sensitive enough, you might be in tears by the end of this movie.
Yeah, easily.
But that's balanced out by the fact that this movie is based on a comic book. And if you look, I'm not like an expert on this, but I have leafed through a few Spider-Man comic books. Spider-Man is almost always fucking joking around. The stuff with Giamatti at the beginning, where he knocks on his window and says, "Hey, Mr. Criminal, could you roll your window down?" Is right out of a comic book. Like, completely. The scene where maybe not many people will like because it's a really, really badass scene. I'm of course talking about the scene where Electro fucks shit up.
Yes.
That scene ends with a comedy bit that involves Spider-Man wearing a fireman's hat. Once again, seems a little out of place because it's punctuating a really badass scene. But once again, feels like something you'd read right out of a comic book. I could actually see an illustrated picture of that. And it felt like I was 2002, May of 2002. So I was 11 when Raimi's first movie came out. And I had all the fucking action figures for both, third 1 and 2. Mm. I was kind of out of it by 3, but I think most people were. I had all the goddamn action figures, like, the Jameson's desk, which had the movable items on it because he was slamming it. J.K. Simmons' hand is actually in a fist on the action figure. Jameson is teased in this movie, too.
Yeah, it is.
I was expecting him to be there because I was like, did they cast him? And I didn't hear, but he's teased, so he's there, but he's not quite there yet. I'm really curious to see everybody's saying bring J.K. Simmons back. But anyway,
I think it might actually happen at this point.
Anyway, what I'm saying about my love for... And another thing is the fact that, despite... X-Men was 2 years prior, but a lot of people give credit to Raimi's first Spider-Man movie for bringing the superhero genre really back to a blockbuster area. It was like, whenever a superhero movie came out right after the first Spider-Man, it was a fucking event. And this movie kind of brings back that feeling. I basically felt like basically, if you want to use a cliche... I basically felt like I was 11 years old again watching this movie.
Yep.
Which is something I really, really appreciated and really wish I could feel more. And despite the fact that, there may be some aspects of this movie that are kind of dumb or some people think are overdone and there's too much in there, I'm going to be honest with you. The way I feel when I saw this movie is what made me love movies in the first place. Yep. It is like this massive, massive blockbuster, and it's everything you expect a big, fun blockbuster to be. It's not overly obnoxious like a Transformers movie, and it's not like overly dumb or offensive like a Transformers movie. I was going to have another example there, but
same thing.
Transformers is basically... I don't hate the Transformers movies the way most people do. I mean, I don't like them. The first one's okay, but they're getting,
Now we're rebooting the series.
Dark of the Moon was better than Revenge of the Fallen, at least. But the bar.
Very well.
There's kind of a connotation now that goes with blockbusters where they went from being really fun and exciting and like event things to just being obnoxious things for dumb people. But this felt like an old-fashioned blockbuster. stuff that I would be really, really excited to see when I was like 10.
Mm-hmm.
And that's, I'm sure some people could word that to make it sound like an insult, but it's a huge compliment from me. So I don't care about the length.
Nope.
And it's not very often anymore because we see so many movies a week. We have 6 movies on this video again. I find myself a lot, even if I like a movie, just kind of saying, okay, this can end now. This is the first time in a really long... I can't even think of the last movie I saw that I just didn't want to end. Like, this movie just kept piling stuff on, and I was just sitting there really, really enjoying myself and kind of saying in the back of my head, man, people are going to be so pissed this isn't over yet.
Yeah.
But I don't care. I was like a Rings fanboy watching Return of the King. But no, I don't care at all that there's a half hour left when the movie should be over. And the entire last half hour of this movie should have been in the third movie. I don't care at all. I was glad to see it all at once like that. So, yeah. That's how much I love this movie.
Yeah, it's phenomenal. And we will go into it completely tomorrow.
So, alright, I guess, I don't know what the fuck order I'm doing this in now. I guess we'll do Devil's Knot next.
Well, now I know where to start the video.
Okay.
Well, I guess we're doing Devil's Knot next.
Okay, so, Devil's Knot is another movie that people frowned upon immediately when they heard it was being made because they thought it was unnecessary.
Mm-hmm.
Because we've already had Paradise Lost, Paradise Lost 2, Paradise Lost 3, and West of Memphis. And the book Devil's Knot, which this based its screenplay off of. I only saw one of those documentaries. I saw the third Paradise Lost, only because it was Oscar season.
You never watched West of Memphis?
I watched the first half hour, but then I, for some reason, never just got around to the rest of it. But between seeing the third Paradise Lost, because it pretty much recaps everything in the first two and then gives the rest of the case information. And, internet. Glorious internet. Yeah, everybody pretty much knows the story front to back now, you would think.
Yeah.
So everybody was pissed that they were making a dramatized version of it.
And they're still doing another one, too.
Because it's all, like the people who, know the case are the ones saying, we have 4 movies to give us the real stuff. We don't need this. We don't need a movie. So, basically, I guess this movie was made for the people that wouldn't watch a documentary. Because those people do exist.
Yeah.
And this can bring, how important this case is. It could shine a light on, people who wouldn't necessarily not know.
Yeah, exactly.
Like, it may be one of those things that you know about, but you didn't watch the documentaries or read a book or anything, so you don't really know anything about it, except terms like the West Memphis 3 and Damien Eccles and Released.
You told me about this a long time ago, even before, when Paradise Lost, when I watched it the first time, and watching West of Memphis, I really got into this case, like, big time. And I was really hyped when I heard this movie was coming out.
So, and it's from an acclaimed director. It's the guy that did The Sweet Hereafter and Exotica, among other movies. Worse movies, but Sweet Hereafter and Exotica are good. He got an Oscar nomination for The Sweet Hereafter, actually. And he was a really good choice for it when you watch his movies, because he's kind of got that... Basically, movies like The Sweet Hereafter are about, like, dealing with tragedy and human beings being human beings. It's a really beloved movie in the right crowd. And it mainly focuses on Ron Lax, who was the investigator. It's hard to say his name Lax because he's Lomax in The Railway Man, which we're talking about later.
Nice.
Only 2 letters, and it's the same name. But anyway, and Pam Hobbs, who was the mother of one of the murdered kids, who is Reese Witherspoon. I did mention that Ron Lax is Colin Firth. It's a worth noting that this movie also has like a really big cast. This was one of those ones where I was kind of watching the cast list form. Mm-hmm. Despite the fact that the 3 on trial are played by unknowns, which apparently they did on purpose. Because everybody, including me, was thinking Damien Eccles and immediately said, cast Michael Pitt right now.
Yes, immediately.
But they went with unknowns. So, but in the other cast we have we have Alessandro Nivola, who is Terry Hobbs. In a bit of casting that says, even if you don't know the case, casting him basically says, I'm fucking guilty.
King Heel, Terry Hobbs.
And he plays that all the way too. Like even if you don't know the case and you're watching the movie, you fucking know Terry Hobbs is guilty.
Absolutely.
The great Kevin Durant, who's showing up a lot more lately, which makes me really happy. Real huge Canadian ex-hockey player Kevin Durant, playing what's the guy's name? John Mark Byers, I think.
Yes.
I can't remember if it's Mark John or John Mark, but basically perfectly doing that backwoods redneck, complete oblivious to everything around him, thus fucking himself over because he's so fucking dumb. Of course, Dane DeHaan, who plays one of the suspects. He kind of comes in and out of the movie. Somebody they kind of wasted was Amy Ryan. Mm-hmm. There was a subplot because Lax is going through a divorce while he's working on the case. I understand why that subplot's there, but they kind of wasted Amy Ryan's talent. She's an Oscar-nominated actress and very well respected, but she doesn't really do much here except the bitchy ex-wife thing. And she only has like a couple of scenes that I even remember. You have somebody who's in a lot of this director's movies. Bruce Greenwood is the judge. I've mentioned in a few videos how much I love Bruce Greenwood, unless it's the Endless Love review. Martin Henderson and Stephen Moyer were there as lawyers in the case. I didn't recognize Martin Henderson until the credits, because I knew he was supposed to be in it, and then while I was watching the movie I forgot he was in it, and then when I saw his name my mind went back to that. Of course, he was right there in front of me. Elias Koteas is, I think, Damien's parole officer. He's another one of the director's regulars. And Mira Enos is the kind of this trashy woman who supposedly has evidence against them, but whose stories keep getting contradicted. And then eventually she just says, fuck it, I was lying. And even for people who don't know, like, for people who do know the case, it's still interesting to watch how the movie portrays it and how it, like, shapes it.
Yeah.
Because it has to obviously make it unfold, but there's so much to kind of put in. Unfortunately, one of the big unfortunate mistakes this movie makes is the fact that it's a little under 2 hours. I'm not saying totally bloat it, but this movie probably should have been longer because...
Look at all the documentaries, how long they were.
And the fact that there's 4 of them.
Yeah.
One of the big problems this movie does is probably the biggest problem with the movie, is they take probably the most interesting aspects of the case itself, and they're just text at the end. We don't even see, like, there's not even some... Imagine the emotional payoff if we'd had a scene when they're released.
Yeah. No, Laura's not even in the movie. Not even referenced once. Damien Eccles himself was mad about that.
So I was just kind of... So if you... That's a problem. If you really know the case, that's probably something you really dislike. Is just when it seems like the movie's going to start getting interesting, it's done. They just throw the shit at you really fast in the text. And it's almost like they realize they're throwing too much text at you because they try to kind of switch it up because you get text, and then more text. And it's like, hey, all this stuff would have been awesome to see on screen. Too bad it's not. And then we get a fade out. And then more text scrolls. So I think that should have been their sign. Maybe we should have, like, kept making the movie a little longer.
I have a feeling Johnny Depp's movie will focus more on the arraignment and everything. the stuff that was just text in this one.
Probably behind the bars too.
Oh, easily.
We almost never see that in the movie. Really, we see him like sitting there in his cell, but we don't really go much into that anymore.
No, not at all.
But I do commend it because this is one of those movies where it could have felt like some cheap TV movie, and I say that kind of hesitantly because I'm sure people will probably accuse it of that if they hate it enough.
Yeah.
But it didn't feel, and another problem was I was afraid it would feel like it was like taking all the stuff we already know and just kind of cramming it at us.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just kind of watching a movie where we're just kind of waiting for stuff to unfold that we already know about. But I thought it actually unfolded it rather well.
Yeah.
To where it didn't feel... I mean, obviously we do know everything, but it didn't really feel like that. So I'd say that's, you know, a good compliment to the director for being able to pull that off.
It also lets you draw your own conclusion who could possibly be the culprit of what actually happened. It even throws out something that I don't remember very much of with the guy from the Bojangles.
Yeah.
In the bathroom.
And there is, and yeah, obviously there's all kinds of true story movies where everybody knows what happens and how it ends.
Yeah.
It's just if a director can make that engrossing
of course.
to any audience. And I thought he did just fine here.
Absolutely.
So, I said, I don't think it's very well liked by most people, but I think they were out to get it from the get-go just because they didn't want a dramatization of a story they already knew from highly effective documentaries. Of course, it goes without saying, of course, you know, watching those documentaries on HBO are going to be more effective than this, obviously, but it's just a movie. It's just a dramatization of what... There's so many true stories, I don't know why this one's getting the shit end of the stick, because I don't think there's anything wrong with the execution of it.
Well.
No pun intended. So... Yeah, and of course, you know, there's even a scene in the movie where outside the courthouse, Lax approaches one of the HBO documentarians and asks them questions.
Yeah, that was funny to me.
Because one of the big points in the case was when they did the first Paradise Lost, John Mark Byers said too much to the documentarian.
Yeah.
And that's what got his ass as a suspect. But yeah, it's a lot of people like to give Colin Firth shit when he tries an American accent. Because, I don't think people would know that if they didn't know Colin Firth so well. I think they just think Colin Firth has a weird voice.
Yeah.
But, I thought he's fine.
Wasn't bad.
I don't think there's a time where Colin Firth is unwatchable.
No.
I especially liked him in The English Patient with, Rafe, because I don't say my F's loud enough. So, or PHs given the context. And of course, Reese Witherspoon is almost always great. There's a couple of scenes that might seem a little, I don't know, maybe Lifetime movie, I guess. Like the scene where she's dramatically pulling her hair out and handing it to the cops. But, you know, I was wondering about that because you look at, not to be disrespectful to anybody, but I mean, when you hear about the casting, you look at the real Pam Hobbs, you don't think Reese Witherspoon at all. Not even slightly.
Nope.
But she still managed to pull it off pretty well.
Yeah, she was fun.
So she kind of made herself look that Bill too, which was weird to see. Because Reese Witherspoon is normally very nice to look at. So maybe that was a bit of miscasting, but nothing to be enraged about.
She did what she could with what she had.
Yeah. So you're gonna hear awful, terrible things about this movie, but if you don't know about the case, and you're not a fan of documentaries, this will introduce it to you because there are people out there that just don't watch documentaries. So
that's why they don't get brought to major theaters most of the time.
Yeah, unless they're by Michael Moore.
Yes.
So we'll go on to our next movie, which is oddly enough a movie about a doppelganger, and the movie itself has a doppelganger this year.
It's almost like they did that shit on purpose.
No, I actually got the chance to ask the director of Prisoners if he had seen this movie yet, and I said Prisoners, Enemy, it's the same thing. I meant to say Enemy, but he's just the director of Prisoners to me. He did Ensemble too, but fuck that. We're talking about The Double, which is Richard Ayoade's movie. His first movie after Submarine, which I wasn't a fan of.
Yes.
That he directed, I mean. That's not to mention The Watch. The Double is a very interesting concept, and we'll be talking about Enemy probably sometime next month. I've already seen it, but I'll delay it until its DVD is coming out.
Okay.
The Double is basically about a very small, in self-esteem guy played by Jesse Eisenberg. I know how hard that is to believe. And he basically works for this government agency that's really mysterious. We never really quite catch on to what he does. We just know that he always gets screamed at Wallace Shawn. And he has a thing for his neighbor across the street, who's played by Mia Wasikowska. But he's too afraid to approach her. He just watches her through a telescope like a creeper. And he goes to work and he never gets credit for his work. He's been there for 7 years and nobody knows his name and nobody recognizes him. He might as well not even exist.
He's Mr. Cellophane.
He works, and his workplace is kind of like the workplace in Brazil. It's one of those places. But one day, a new coworker shows up. And it is basically his double. It is an exact replica of him. Obviously, it's a character also played by Jesse Eisenberg that looks like him and dresses like him and sounds like him. He's an absolute twin, except that he is the exact opposite, and he's knee-deep in women, he's cheats at life, and basically can do anything he wants, and has an extremely overpoweringly high self-confidence. So basically everything that the other one strives to be. And the one walked all over is Simon James, and the new guy is James Simon. And of course, nobody picks up on this except for him. There's a humorous coworker played by Noah Taylor, who's basically just doesn't give a shit about anything. And he says, so the new coworker, does he remind you of anybody? No, not really. And then he actually takes him over, and he says, look at me, then look at him. And he actually does, and he says, doesn't he look like me? Yeah, a little bit, I guess. And then he just leaves it at that. And nobody else seems to notice this except for him. So basically, they form a friendship. And basically, James is going to teach Simon how to get Mia Wasikowska as long as Simon basically takes all his aptitude tests for him. Because all he has to do is go in there and say that he's James. Because obviously they'll buy it because they're exact replicas of each other. And James basically shows him how to not be so confined. But the problem is that James basically starts to take over his life. And basically, at one point he blackmails him, like he starts sleeping with the boss's daughter, and then takes pictures of it. And he basically says, if you don't do this for me, I'm going to show the boss these pictures and say it's you. Because he can do that, and it would work. So, I mentioned this before, I'm going to go ahead and say it again. I was not a fan of Ayoade's last movie, Submarine. At all, really. And that kind of carries over here. I will say a lot of the Submarine cast is in it. Sally Hawkins has a really brief scene as a receptionist. The kid plays a detective that specializes in only suicides. Paddy Considine has a funny cameo where he's on this TV show that Eisenberg's character watches every day. It's like this cheap Flash Gordon sci-fi show. And I think Noah Taylor was in Submarine also. And there's a really funny scene with Chris O'Dowd, because Chris O'Dowd is always funny. The one thing that was really distracting about this movie was how much it seems like it's borrowing from other things. Like, when I tell you the plot, it might sound really original, but in all honesty, when you watch this movie, it's basically Ayawati taking a little bit of Gilliam and a little bit of Jean-Pierre Jeunet and making Eraserhead. That's basically what this movie is. And that might sound like a compliment depending on who you are, but I'm on again, off again with how I feel about Gilliam, and I can't fucking stand Eraserhead. I think Eraserhead is a pretentious piece of shit, and I try really hard to not use pretentious, but Jesus fucking Christ, if there is any movie in the entire world that I would call pretentious, it would probably be Eraserhead. And I got a lot of that from this. This movie doesn't feel pretentious or anything, but it feels like Eraserhead, if that makes sense. And I do love Jean-Pierre Jeunet's movies and his vision, and it kind of feels like, yeah, it feels exactly like a composite vision of Gilliam and Jeunet, which, I don't know. It made me feel like I should have been watching a better movie, which this just didn't do for me. And it's apparently it's mainly a comedy, it's supposed to be. There's things throughout the movie that I thought were funny, but I didn't really, like, outwardly laugh at. But I don't know. And it does have its moments. Like, there's one scene that particularly stands out I remember laughing at. I don't know why this scene has stood out to me, but it's one of the scenes where James is basically telling Simon how to stop being a pussy, basically. I believe that's his actual wording. And one of the things they talk about is you can't eat ice cream cones. And Simon says, why? I really like ice cream cones. And he's like, well, of course you like ice cream cones. Yeah, of course you like ice cream cones, because ice cream's delicious, but you can't have it in a cone because a cone's gay. You have to have it in a cup. Those are his actual words. You can't have it in a cone because having it in a cone is gay. He says the only time you can have it in a cone is if you're on a date. That is his advice on ice cream. Apparently it's based off a Dostoevsky. I can never fucking say his name anymore. Dostoevsky book. I'm still saying it wrong. I just can't say it right. I hear the correct pronunciation in my head, but I can't say it. Mm-hmm. Kathy Moriarty's also in this movie. It was nice seeing her. She is there's an interesting kind of thing that adds to his character about being walked all over, where he goes to the same diner every day, and he gets the same waitress, who is Kathy Moriarty, and every day she's really, really rude and mean to him. But he goes back, Mia Wasikowska asks him why he goes back every day, and his response is, because he's loyal like that. So, yeah, it's got that surreal feel where it feels like a really weird dream, which I've said before I always appreciate in movies, but I don't know, something about this movie just didn't do it for me, and I don't mind movies like this. Like, I just gave Under the Skin a good review last week. I don't mind things that are kind of abstract and not exactly forward in what they mean, but I just didn't care enough about this. It felt too... Another thing is, when it's not so much that it's too abstract, some of it's actually too obvious. Like, there is a scene towards the beginning that comes back at the very end. And when you see that scene at the beginning, I had a sense of what that scene was supposed to mean, and when it came back at the end, I wasn't surprised. So it could also probably be because I had seen Enemy before this. We'll get to that review later, like I said, but I will just say, and another problem is that Enemy did this a lot better. like where Enemy is like really unique and thought provoking, and this just kind of feels like the retread of other directors. So I love Richard Iwadi in every other sense. Like he's on that like I loved him in The Watch, and he does that that British quiz show, and I think he has like an actual show that he was on. As a director, I'm not feeling it, at least yet. So I guess we'll see what happens. Apparently, it's getting a really good reaction, but then again, so did Submarine, and I wasn't a fan of either. So I guess we'll see what happens. I guess we're gonna go on now to Blue Ruin. Blue Ruin is a really critically acclaimed movie that apparently won a prize at Cannes last year. I didn't hear about it until it was released last week. It had a limited release last week, which is why it's being reviewed now. And I didn't know what it was going in either. It's always fun to do that, to just start a movie and I have no idea what it is.
Yeah.
Except for the fact that it comes out this week. Blue Ruin is an indie revenge movie. With a practically nameless cast. It's got a couple of names I recognize, but maybe most people not so much. The lead is an actor named Macon Blair, I think is his name. And the movie starts, and what's really interesting about this movie is it's an hour and a half, but the first half hour or so, the story of the movie is a mystery that kind of unravels. Because the movie starts, and this main character, Dwight, has a scraggly beard, and he's bathing in somebody else's house while they're not home. He just broke into this house and is taking a bath, and then they come home, and he escapes out the window. And we learn that he's basically living a homeless lifestyle, like he eats out of dumpsters, and he lives in his car, and all that. But then, as the story unravels, he eventually gets a knock on his window from a cop, and the cop takes him to the police station. And it's a cop he apparently knows, because they seem to be on a first-name basis. And the cop tells him that somebody is out of prison. And the fact that this person is being released from prison seems to really, really upset him. Well, as the movie goes, we learn that this person, we see a newspaper article, and it just says the person in prison is in there for a double murder, but they're being released today. So we learn, it's not really a spoiler or anything, the reason he wants to get revenge is because this person killed his parents. And so he tracks this person down and follows them after they are released from prison. He follows them, he goes to the prison and waits, and then follows them to a bar, and then follows the guy into the bathroom, and stabs him to death. This is just the start of the movie. This is what sets the movie off. Because after he does this, he takes a bath and shaves off the beard and looks totally different. And tracks down his sister, who is Amy Hargreaves, who I only know because of you.
Yes. Kimberly from Brain Scan. She was also in Shame.
Shame, yes. Because you were you had no idea that was her in Shame, and when I told you, your head exploded.
Yes.
So he goes to her, and there's a really effective scene where he basically breaks down to her and confesses to what he just did. And so at this point in the movie, you wonder where it's going to go. The problem is the fact that the guy that killed his parents, has like 5 other bloodthirsty family members. So then it basically turns into a one person against a whole family war. And it just goes back and forth. And there is lots of bloodshed. This is one of those movies where it's really, really slow burn. Where, it's obviously got that story that's obviously building to something ominous and violent. But it takes its time to get there because it needs to set everything up. Yeah. But when those little blasts of violence happen, it's really graphic and really disturbing. Which makes it all the more effective, especially since it happens so infrequently. Another character in the movie is an actor named Devin Rattray, who I brought up a couple of times. Well, I brought him up in R.I.P.D. in Nebraska. He is Buzz in the Home Alone movies. And he is an old friend of Dwight who just happens to have a closet full of guns. And he goes to him for help. And that's basically when this war begins. It's really, the guy's obviously a writer. It's one of those movies where you can just tell while you watch it that the guy that made this is a writer-director. And it's not exactly an original movie or anything, but it's so well executed and well acted and well written that it kind of makes it its own thing. And there's a couple of really good lines in the movie, like when he's basically telling his sister that he's going to go to war with his family instead of letting it go. And after he's killed the guy, she's basically packing up and leaving so nothing bad happens to her. And the last thing she says to him is, "I'd forgive you if you were crazy, but you're just weak." I thought that was a really good line. And the interesting thing, it's really interesting to watch this character develop, because he does these horrific things, and he's obviously not completely there, but at the same time, he's this really, like, neurotic character. It's like, watching this guy in this movie would be like watching Woody Allen in Straw Dogs. If you can imagine that. That's what watching this movie felt like. Like, there's this really funny scene where, he basically calls the family, and he's basically, they don't answer, he's leaving a message on their machine, and we hear them listening to it. And he's basically saying, you know, yeah, I did it, I killed him, and if you want to make this a war, we'll make it a war. If not, we can just go our separate ways. I'm sorry I bothered you at home. And then and there's one scene where he gets one of the brothers in his trunk, and he drives around with him. And the guy's in the back, and he's like slamming on the trunk, and he's screaming to let him out, and he's like screaming death threats and all that. And this goes on for a long time. It's like a 5-minute scene of just him going from place to place with the brother in the trunk, just basically screaming what he's going to do to him and that he better let him out. And then finally he just says, "I'm not letting you out of the trunk until I have a gun." And there's a pause, and then you just hear the guy say, "Well, shit, I can get you a gun." From the trunk. So despite how bleak, it's really fucking bleak, despite how bleak and dark it is, it's still got that sense of humor thrown in there. And just the idea that a character like him would be in the situation to begin with is kind of darkly funny in a way. But yeah, the only problem is it does feel a little like retreaded territory. Like, there's a scene where he takes an arrow to his thigh, and he has to go into a pharmacy and take care of himself. And it's the scene right out of No Country for Old Men, when Sugar goes into the pharmacy and then goes to the hotel and fixes himself. He eventually gives in and goes to the hospital, but as the scene played up to that, it felt exactly like that. I don't know if it was an intentional reference. Another movie that came to mind, I don't know exactly what it was. I don't know if it's the driving around in a car with guns or just the ominous feel of the movie in general. This movie felt like Blue Caprice, too. Which I think I mentioned in one video that I didn't really care for Blue Caprice. This is much better, I promise. It's just, I kind of got that same vibe. Not to mention the word blue is in the title. I didn't even think about that. But yeah, this movie's getting a really great reaction, and it's probably going to be highly recommended by anybody that's seen it, so. And I'm not like crazy for it like some of the critics have been, but it's really good, and I would check it out. So, as long as you have a strong stomach for violence and bleak endings. Speaking of bleak, our next movie is a movie that's been getting some attention, which surprised me because I didn't know what it was until a couple of weeks ago. A movie called Kid Cannabis. The star of this movie is the fat kid from Project X. And Kenny Wormald from the Footloose remake. I think it was just when we did the Footloose video, I was asking where he was.
Yeah.
Here he is. And I was really curious about what this movie was. When you look at the poster, it looks like a stoner movie. And the first hour basically is. But I was curious where I was going because, once again, I mentioned this before, like most movies nowadays, the very first thing we see in Kid Cannabis is the words based on a true story. But once the movie was over, I kind of Googled this, and the movie actually stayed really close to everything that happened. Basically, the first hour is basically kind of a stoner comedy, where it's, he gets the, this kid, Nate Norman, was a pizza delivery boy, who lived with his mom and his brother. And he basically, his mom, like, has to stay up all night working and basically work all day, and she hardly makes anything. And he has to basically play Jennifer Lawrence in Winter's Bone and take care of everything. But he's tired of being broke and not being able to do that, so he delivers a pizza to Lachlan Monroe, who is this major drug dealer and has, like, this mansion with naked women everywhere. And basically that visit basically convinces him to smuggle weed across the border between Idaho and Canada. So it basically, the first 45 minutes or so are basically his inept attempts at this. And he basically gets on a first-name basis with the border guards, and has to be cavity searched every time he crosses the border, going one way or the other. And their plan is basically they'll drive across and then one of them runs across the border with it. It's basically how it works. They dress in camouflage because they really overdo it, and they get really, really, like, hyped and really nervous, even though they're just crossing the border and it's really no problem at all. And then eventually this leads to him basically becoming the Jordan Belfort of weed. He gets really, really power hungry and he starts to take over, and there's parties and girls everywhere. He's being anything but subtle. And this movie goes really dark really fast, because there is a rival dealer played by Aaron Yu, who is, you might remember as Shia's friend in Disturbia. And he was in the Friday the 13th remake. He's this rich kid named Brendan Butler, who basically has no problem killing people, even though he's only a 20-year-old overachiever living with an adopted family, or from an adopted family. Adoptive family. The first time we see him, he's having a Halloween party, and the only thing he's wearing is black underwear, cowboy boots, a holster with 2 guns, and a fake mustache. And he's the threat of the movie. And despite only being a 20-year-old overachiever, Brendan Butler was a very threatening person, apparently. So much so that the drama actually starts to form when he actually goes to their house during one of the parties, firing a gun. Just randomly. He will actually kill people. And we know this immediately because when he's introduced 5 minutes into the movie, there's kind of an overbearing narration by Nate's character. And as soon as we're introduced to him, he basically says, this is the one person, if I could eliminate from this story, I would. So you know he was going to take them to bad places. And they get involved with some outsiders. Like there's their supplier is an extremely, extremely laid-back pot grower played by John C. McGinley, who is great in it. And the best performance in the movie, which is Ron Perlman, who's basically an investor. He's basically like a guy. According to the text on screen at the end, he's still running things under an alias. He's basically the guy that helps them be as big as they are. And there's this really great scene where he's basically talking about how he's not foolish enough to just get involved with some kid who says, hey, I have weed, let's do business. So there's this scene where they meet up in a parking garage, And Perlman's basically going through everything, and then basically tells him that he knows his entire life. And he brings up his mom and his brother and everybody. And in referring to his mom, he says, "You do know that if you try to cheat me out of anything or try to fuck me over, 170 pounds of rotting meat is not hard to get rid of." And thus a partnership was born. So, one of the drawbacks to this movie will probably be the fact that this character, Nate, is extremely unlikable. From his overabundance of narration to his basically thinking he's this drug lord. He basically thinks he's Scarface after a while, when he's just like this fat 18-year-old kid who didn't know any better like a month ago. It's kind of, but at the same time, and you know, the arrogance and everything. But the thing is I don't think he's supposed to be likable, because it's basically the same argument people have with The Wolf of Wall Street, whether or not the movie was glorifying what he was doing and him as a person. I mean, there are moments, because there's one of the big elements of the movie is the fact that this is all about taking care of his mom, and how he's basically willing to sacrifice everything if his mom's gonna, like, be in danger or anything. So, it's really up for debate whether or not the movie is glorifying him or not. Because if they are, that's probably a huge thing against it. But if they mean for him to be as unlikable as he comes off, and they want people to not like him, then they succeeded. It's hard to tell. I guess it's also a point against the movie that it's hard to distinguish what they were doing, as far as that's concerned. But yeah, it basically starts, it was a little, I wasn't sure what to expect, so I was a little surprised when it starts off as this practically stoner version of The Wolf of Wall Street, and then by the end of the movie, it's Alpha Dog, is what it reminded me of. With real murder cases and real trials and real very long prison sentences. It's interesting, but like I said, I looked it all up, and it sounds like the movie stuck to everything pretty closely. So, I would mildly recommend it. I think it might. You know, I don't know what the critical reaction or anything is, but yeah, it's all right. It's a mixed bag, obviously, but it's all right. Our last movie is The Railway Man. Colin Firth is back. We also have Nicole Kidman and Stellan Skarsgård. This movie has three different things going on. There's good aspects of this movie, and there's not so good ones. It starts off as a love story. Colin Firth is on a train, and he meets Nicole Kidman, and it's a scene right out of Brief Encounter. It is so blatantly obvious, Colin Firth actually points out the window to a location and says, "Hey, I think that's where they shot Brief Encounter." And they fucking talk about Brief Encounter. I think the movie wants us to know that this scene is a lot like the movie Brief Encounter. Because they meet once, and then Colin Firth's narrating, and he gets off the train and he says, "I think I've fallen in love." So naturally, he more or less stalks her and ends up on the same train with her again. But it's okay because they immediately say, this wasn't a coincidence. We basically found each other on purpose. And we go really quickly, and suddenly they're married. And that's what this movie looks like for a little while. Basically, if Brief Encounter were 5 minutes long and actually ended with them getting together. But then suddenly, in kind of an unintentionally hilarious turn of events, on their wedding night, after having not shown any signs of this before, Colin Firth suddenly falls on the ground and starts shrieking because he's having war flashbacks. Because he was in a POW camp. Well, then suddenly the movie's a POW movie. And it's told in flashback. He's played by Jeremy Irvine, who's probably in the movie more than he is. You probably know him from War Horse, or that movie where Dakota Fanning's dying. And basically it's Nicole Kidman going to Stellan Skarsgård, who was also in the POW camp with him. And she's like, basically their marriage is falling apart because suddenly he's going catatonic now. Because of the war flashbacks that were never apparent until now, until they got married. So the entire second chunk of the movie is Stellan Skarsgård telling her the stories of when they were in the camp, and we see those in flashback. And there he was basically tortured with the help of an interpreter. And then we get that whole story. And then the third story is the most interesting aspect of the movie, which is that interpreter that assisted in having him tortured while he was in the camp. He finds out through a newspaper article that that interpreter is still alive. So he's going to take a train to Thailand and confront this interpreter and possibly get revenge on him for everything. Those are three totally separate things to have in one movie. There's something really, really great here, and obviously this is a true story too. The guy wrote a book. When this screened at a film festival, it might have been TIFF. The woman, Mrs. Lomax, the woman that Nicole Kidman plays, was there and got a standing ovation. All of this really happened, and it's a really great story. And it's a really touching ending to the story too. But the movie that has to tell this story to us is so incredibly bland and lifeless. I didn't feel like they were totally giving us everything. For starters, I read that if it seems like they got married really fast, it's because to keep the movie going, they had to condense it. Mm-hmm. Because apparently they got married like 3 years after they met or something. In the movie, it's like after the second time they meet. So the real life story is a much better story than this compacted thing we get here. Is it weird that, I'm not saying this should be entertaining or anything, but I'm saying as far as like riveting, stuff to tell a riveting story, is it not weird that the POW stuff is the least interesting thing in this movie? That seems a little off, doesn't it? For a brief encounter ripoff and a revenge thing, for a POW portion to be the least interesting thing, something's not right here. Because, Jeremy Irvine didn't really make an impression on me in the other movies I've seen him in, but he's fine here. He does a perfect Colin Firth impression. But, and here's the thing, if they had basically picked one, it might have been, obviously, the whole story is the whole true story, but if you're gonna make a movie, you kinda gotta make a movie interesting, and if you can't do that with what you have, you might as well, obviously they're already stretching facts, if they're stretching the time. Maybe if this had just been a movie about him going to Thailand and then basically what happened there, because it's basically a lot of them reminiscing and then Firth torturing him back the way he was tortured all those years ago. If just him and that interpreter had been its own movie, which totally could be done because movies like that exist, this movie could have been great. Mm-hmm. Maybe the POW stuff by itself, if they had made it interesting, would have been something. And the love story seemed like it could have been something. I'm biased because Nicole Kidman's my favorite actress. Most people probably found that dull, but after a while, the love story basically just sets up. Because here's the thing. I don't know if you noticed when I was going through this, but the fact that we start off with this brief encounter-esque movie doesn't go anywhere. the whole love story thing kind of just goes off to the side. I guess it kind of sets up for it because the war flashbacks ruin his marriage. I don't know. It just seemed really uneven. But there's a great story in here, and it's not the profound emotional powerhouse it should be. And there's times where you can kind of tell it thinks that it is. I don't know. And when I say that, I mean the people that made it. Somebody actually once said, how can a movie, try to be something it's not? It's an inanimate object, it can't try. You know what the fuck I mean? I mean the fucking people that made it, you dumbasses. And there's a couple of things that are... Normally I don't care for people that say something was unintentionally funny because I think it's kind of childish, but I guess I was a bit childish while watching this movie because some things just... The score, for instance, the score was not working here at all. It was... I couldn't help but find the score a little inappropriate at times and just not right. And like I said, the first time he has a war flashback and freaks out just seems so sudden and out of place. I couldn't help but see an absurdity in it. It's worth noting that Nicole Kidman did this movie at the very last minute because Rachel Weisz was supposed to play her, but she had to back out because of scheduling. And Colin Firth basically went to Nicole Kidman and said, "Can you do me a favor? I really want to make this movie and I don't have a wife." And that's basically why Nicole Kidman's in this movie, because Colin Firth asked her to be. So, yeah. A different director, I don't even know who this director is, but a different director probably could have been able to work with this. Because Firth is fine, Kidman's fine, Skarsgård's always great, even though he's not there for very long. His character, especially in flashback. There's something great here, but it's not in this movie. So that's a disappointment. So I think we're done.
Alright, so as always, we recap, just like back in the old days. The Amazing Spider-Man 2.
Yes.
It's obvious right there. Devil's Knot.
Yeah. You know, if you're not somebody who's like a junkie on the case, I think you'll be fine with it.
Blue Ruin.
Yeah. I guess it's a slow burn movie, but I think if you have the patience to stick with it and watch the mystery of it unravel, unless you watch this review and you pretty much know the mystery.
Kid Cannabis.
It's all right. Yeah.
And The Railway Man.
Nah, unfortunately.
It's a shame.
Yeah.
So we've got a spoiler alert video where we're going to dissect The Amazing Spider-Man 2 tomorrow. We got a brand new Versus, very outer space this week. And...
Has nothing to do with Coen Brothers or Adam Driver, though.
Nope. It needed to be said. And next week, same thing as normal, we're going to be talking about... This is going to be a fun video. It's Neighbors and Legends of Oz and Mom's Night Out is what it sounds like. So it's not going to be a fun video. Might be a fun video for you guys. And we could just bash things, maybe. But Neighbors looks alright. So I guess we'll see.
Neighbors has a 100% on Rotten Tomatoes right now.
Really? How many people have seen it?
I don't know. It's been there for a while. I don't know.
That's crazy.
Probably only like 10 or something, but...
We'll see. So, any parting words?
That's it.